Hello, everyone. Greetings from National Philosophical Counseling Association. I'm Dr. Himani Chaukar, a certified logic-based consultant from Mumbai, India. Logic-based therapy is a leading modality of philosophical counseling developed by American philosopher Dr. Elliot D. Cohen. Dr. Cohen is the executive director of NPCA and the president of Logic-Based Therapy and Consultation Institute. He has written many books about logic-based therapy, like What Would Aristotle Do, New Rational Therapy, Making Peace with Imperfection, Logic-Based Therapy and Everyday Emotions, to name a few. It's my privilege to have Dr. Cohen with us here today to talk about his latest book, Cognitive Behavior Interventions for Self-Defeating Thoughts, helping clients to overcome the tyranny of I can't. A very warm welcome, Dr. Cohen, and great pleasure to have you here.
Oh, wonderful to be here, Himani. I'm very excited about talking with you about the book. So let's get into it.
Yes, absolutely. At the very outset, I want to congratulate you on behalf of the entire philosophy fraternity for writing this revolutionary book. I call it revolutionary because clinical research, statistical analysis is not really a popular methodology followed in philosophy. And your book does that so beautifully. This book, I feel, has brought philosophy at the level of science and will help us teachers of philosophy to answer the most common objection put forth against philosophy, that it doesn't have scientific basis. With the help of these investigations, your book elaborately shows how neurological processes have an impact over our speech and how our speech in turn has an impact over our brain structures. So, Dr. Cohen, for our viewers today, can you please give a brief summary of this book?
The general approach is to look at the terms "I can't" and its correlates. I'm not able to. It's beyond my control. These are oftentimes summarized in the very succinct "I can't." I can't do it. I can't control my emotions. I can't control my volitions, my behavior. This is a word that often gets in our way. It causes a good deal of trouble in our lives, leading to things like risk aversion, low frustration tolerance, hyper egoism, dependence, extreme dependence on others. I can't do anything for myself. Even OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder. So there's a lot of problems that these little words "I can't" can cause. And so what the book does is it gets into the types of reasoning patterns that people exhibit, when they tell themselves they can't, and leading to these various problems. And what it does, and which you nicely alluded to, is it gets into the neurological foundations of the reasoning processes that go on, during those situations. So, shall I say some things about the reasoning process, or would you like to elaborate on that?
Yes, definitely. It would be fantastic to see how exactly this works because, for a layman, if we go into the anatomical details, it becomes highly difficult. But, the plus point of this particular book is that it doesn't include jargon. It just keeps it to the minimum, and it therefore becomes much easy for understanding by any layman. So would you like to elaborate a little bit about this reasoning process and what kind of approach your book suggests to deal with these capacity disavowals?
Sure. The approach is what we call logic-based therapy LBT, which is a form of philosophical counseling. So one important keynote of the book is that philosophy can actually be useful in helping individuals to overcome the sorts of issues that I just mentioned, such as overdependence, obsessive compulsive disorder, and many other kinds of of problems, which I talk about in various chapters in the book. So, how can philosophy help? I mean, this is something that there, as you said, there hasn't really been any scientific analyses of this. And so what I did was I looked to the brain and to see what's going on when people philosophize and when people engage in self-defeating thinking, and looked at what philosophy could do to overcome the self-defeating thinking. So that's the general approach. Now, when we get into the kind of nitty gritty of the neurology of it, we find that the brain is a very complex organ, and it has many functional parts that work together. So when what you're referring to here in terms of boiling it down, for average consumers is that I do take some liberty here. So although the analyses refer to certain fundamental parts of the brain, there's more going on behind the scenes as well. And if we were to go through all the different parts of the brain, it would look like an anatomical lesson, and we would lose the forest for the trees. So I try to maintain some balance there, giving enough information, but not so much that it distorts our understanding or ability to comprehend it. And there is a lot there, even in the condensed analysis. But I think a very important aspect of it is that much of the neurological, the brain science researches, which moves through various functional MRI studies, where we actually scan the brain and we look at what parts of the brain are firing during specific types of human behavior and vocalizations and subjective reports about emotions, and what the science has emphasized previously is a kind of bottom-up approach to emotions. That somehow our amygdala hypothalamic axis gets agitated. This is the kind of reptilian fight or flight mechanism of the brain, and what that does is it feeds our cerebral cortex, the thinking part of our brain. But actually, when you look at it more carefully from the eyes of logic-based therapy, what we find is that many of the emotions, anxieties that about particular events coming up in our lives, or depression, self-doubts, and so forth, about things that happen to us in our lives. During the COVID pandemic, there's been a lot of people who are very down and unhappy. And what's going on in the brain there? Well, it's not so much bottom up, but rather top down. That is to say, the quote unquote higher brain, that is the upper forebrain of our brains, is actually quite active, and that's the thinking part of their brain. So we think our way, into problems. So the upper brain is now talking to the amygdala hypothalamic axis, not the other way around. So we create our own problems that way.
Right, exactly. So, and I feel that, this entire topic is really important, because majority of our life issues and life problems arise out of this very tendency that we show when we do not take responsibility of our actions. So how exactly logic-based therapy or this LBT approach can help us? I particularly here remember the study that you have mentioned, where it is said that when there were two groups, and when people were made to, they were given certain examples which had some words which had values. So words which had which were mentioning values, and the other group where the values, there were no values, it were neutral words. And the results actually showed that there is an increased activity in particular areas of the brain when people read about values philosophies. So would you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's a really exciting opening for philosophy, because what they found is that words that are abstract, as opposed to concrete words, words like life and love and words of that nature, that are generic, as opposed to this particular thing. When we talk in terms of the language of particulars, there's less tendency to have positive valence in that language. It's more neutral. But when you get to the more abstract types of language, there's a greater tendency to have more elevated senses of positivity. Now, what does that mean? Well, essentially, the brain has these various somatosensory regions, parts of the brain that go off when there's negative or positive. And so the abstract language actually promotes, has a greater propensity to promote the parts of the brain that produce positive valence. So you feel good. And this is connected with endorphins, dopamine receptors being firing and so forth, and feeling good. So philosophy, because it's abstract, and because many of the concepts are positive concepts, ideas of love and harmony and peace and unity. When you read Eastern philosophy, you see all those constructs of community and compassion and the like. And logic-based therapy has various virtues that it emphasizes. For instance, courage and temperance and acceptance of reality, which we call metaphysical security, and self-respect and respect for the world, the cosmos, and other people, and so forth. And so that directs the philosophies to a positive, moves them in a positive direction. In other words, what LBT does is it looks for philosophical ideas that support these virtues. And it asks people to think of their philosophies that can help them to become more courageous, help them to become more self-respecting and so forth. So when you get into abstract language of philosophy, that actually moves us towards those guiding virtues, as we call them, the language stimulates the brain, to go off in these positive ways. And as a result of that, you can feel good by embracing your philosophy. And so what I did in clinic here, when I worked with people as I was developing the book, I was trying out the hypothesis. I was asking them to do what I call interoceptive imagery, to get them to actually imagine, themselves in the situations that upset them. And so they would report that they're upset. And then after having spoken with them about their guiding virtues and their philosophies, getting them to resonate with these philosophies, I asked them to switch their thoughts from their negativity, their feelings of negativity that were happening in their brain, to the positive, philosophy. And then I asked them what they're experiencing, while they're thinking of their philosophies. And many of the occasions, virtually all of them, I wouldn't say all, but almost all of the occasions, and there were quite a number of individuals in my clinical studies, reported that they felt a sense of freedom, a sense of relief from the oppression of their previous thoughts. And many of these previous thoughts, revolved around the I can't. I can't. I must have perfection in certain ways, and much of the language was perfectionistic. And if I didn't have it, it's terrible, and I can't stand it. So you have these syndromes of so-called fallacies, what I call cardinal fallacies, that produce these negative states. And then we come along and we say, well, let's look at your guiding virtues, because in LBT, for every fallacy, there's certain guiding virtues that we can use to overcome them. And so they work on their guiding virtues phenomenologically. And then what happens is they report this sense of freedom. And so the goal here is to practice, because the more you practice, the more you wear certain little tracks, so to speak, in the brain that can make these permanent. See, but we now have, the neurological evidence to show through MRI studies, functional MRI studies, that these kinds of connections really happen. And there has been this research that you're talking about that shows, that abstract positive language, can actually work. And logic-based therapy takes this as a door to bring in philosophy because of the nature of philosophy. And one of the things that people often say about philosophy, well, it's so abstract. How can it bake any breads?
Yeah.
Well, it sure can make you feel better.
Yes, and bake bread as well. So Dr. Cohen, is this what you will call a unique feature of logic-based therapy and the approach that you have suggested in this book, which makes it so different from other CBT modalities?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Classical CBT, and I should say that logic-based therapy grew out of rational emotive behavior therapy, which was the first form of cognitive behavior therapy, CBT. What makes logic-based therapy different is its use of logic, virtue theory, and very many different modalities of philosophy, different theories of philosophy that are brought in. So there's much more opportunity here to bring in, virtue and other positive constructs that can help people do and feel better. So that is a major distinction. And also with the logic-based component, what logic-based therapy does is it analyzes practical reasoning in terms of what we call practical syllogisms, comes from the ancient philosopher Aristotle. For instance, if somebody lied to me, then they're a horrible person. This person lied to me, so this person's a horrible person. Those are premises and a conclusion. That's an example of a practical syllogism. What's going on in the brain when that happens? Well, there's a part of the brain, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is active in practical reasoning. But what we're finding here through various studies is that what's going on there are premises and conclusions of this nature. The thoughts of this person lied to me, horrible person, I can't stand this person. That's actually happening in that portion of the brain, and that's feeding from this top-down perspective that I'm talking about. The fight or flight, the amygdala hypothalamus axis is feeding that, and so your pituitary gland is functional, your adrenals are going off, and your blood flow is moving to your limbs, not to your head though, because when you're in a state of stress, you actually have less oxygen, flowing through the blood to your brain, but more to your limbs. So you're not able to think as well. So there's this viciousness too. It feeds back because things start to seem even worse. And so it cycles around and you start feeling that much worse in those circumstances. But it all begins when we're talking about these types of emotions, these top-down emotions, with these syllogisms. You see these practical reasoning chains that we do ourselves. So we are largely responsible for these thought processes. So if you can change those syllogisms to positive syllogisms that resonate, with feeling good, using the abstract language of philosophy, then you could actually change the polarity of your feelings. So it involves a kind of replacement of these negative syllogisms with positive syllogisms. And interestingly, there's a good deal of evidence to suggest that already. I mean, we certainly have miles to go to where we can confirm this, in its entirety, but there's some strong evidence already suggesting that philosophy in the form of logical thinking and very basic logic too, like the example I gave you, we think in these terms. It's not something that we have to learn. We automatically think in these ways, and so we process our thoughts through such mechanisms. So it involves learning to adjust these syllogisms to more positive ones and working on it continuously.
Right. So Dr. Cohen, there have been a lot of people who have studied logic, but they could never connect these dots. So as I said, clinical investigations or statistical analysis is very uncommon in our field. So how did you come up with this whole perspective? Were there any incidences which specifically triggered this thought process? How did you exactly begin this whole thing?
Well, being a teacher of critical thinking for many years, I used to try to teach formal logic and symbolic logic in very, very complex propositional as well as quantification theory to undergraduate students. And I found that maybe 5 to 10% on a good day actually understood what was going on. And then I decided, well, maybe informal logic might work better. And I wrote a book, Caution Faulty Thinking Can Be Harmful to Your Happiness, which I based on cases that of clients that I worked with. And I used all the popular examples of stereotyping and how, manipulation and argument of the club, and misericordium, appeal to pity, and that sort of stuff. And students really got it, So I went from 10% of the class on a good day to 90 to 99 on a good day, percent of students really grasping it. And the only logic that I taught them was what the Latin, modus ponens and modus tollens. If P, then Q, P, therefore Q. And everybody got that. If it rains, the street is wet. It rains. Well, what's going on there? Well, the street is wet. So, they understood that. And when you hung the flesh of the fallacies on those premises, they got that too. So, if I'm saying something like the example I gave, if you lied to me, then you're a horrible person. You lied to me, so you're a horrible person. You could say, well, yeah, that's your thinking. You understand that thinking? Yeah, okay. Well, what about this horrible person? Does that necessarily mean you're a horrible person? Did you ever lie? Yes. Does that mean you're a horrible person? No. So you refuted it. You showed that it's irrational. And students got that. You see, they understood that, but you didn't have to go into quantification logic and a lot of the intricacies of symbolic logic, which is extremely important. But from a practical perspective, it didn't grab many students so that they were able to internalize it. But informal fallacies, as they occur on the premises of very basic forms of reasoning, people do understand that instinctively. It is part of the way the brain operates. And there are theories, hypotheses that tell us that, and I believe that they're correct.
Yeah. So, one more question just in the connection with the earlier question. As this was such a new approach, did you face any specific challenges or criticisms? Were there some people who were very surprised or very, shocked to see that you are adopting such an approach?
Yeah, the challenges always come from different areas of philosophy versus psychology. For instance, philosophers always disagree with one another. Some philosophers say that taking a scientific approach to philosophy is inconsistent with being a philosopher. And then there's the outside criticisms that, well, how can philosophy, you're not trained in psychology, so how can you do anything constructive in the area? So many years ago in the early 90s, I founded a society under the auspices of the American Philosophical Association called the American Society for Philosophy, Counseling, and Psychotherapy, which aimed at bringing psychologists and philosophers of all ilks together, to investigate, the questions of how these sciences and humanities relate to one another. And so I've spent many years trying to build consensus and solidarity, with the community of educators and scientists and philosophers on this. And this was the organization that subsequently was renamed in 2012 as the National Philosophical Counseling Association, and the rest there is pretty much history. But yeah, there have been, these, and there still are clearly, there's these some, in the case of turf battles, that what can you do and what can we do? You just keep out, don't intrude. And the NPCA, the National Philosophical Counseling Association, recognizes that philosophers are not necessarily trained, unless they're otherwise trained, but not in their philosophical education, trained to do mental disorders, for instance. So we're very strict about that. So I want to emphasize that to the public. But working together, to build modalities such as logic-based therapy, which can be helpful to people in solving, everyday issues and problems, as well as, working, if you're qualified, to work with mental disorders and so forth. So there's still much more, ground to cover, in bringing consensus. But I think we're off to a good start.
Yes. And I think this synergy will definitely bring the two areas and two different experts from two areas together. But it will actually open up a lot of new ways to look at the same things, same issues. And ultimately, what is important to us, all of us, is well-being. So in that way, any therapy, any kind of therapy which leads to that well-being, which tries to achieve that well-being for everyone, I think should be talked about and should be encouraged.
Well, those are very inspiring words, and I certainly appreciate your having taken the time to speak about the book.
It's my pleasure to have read the book, and it's a great honor for me to talk to you about your own book. So it was such a pleasant journey throughout the book. I initially was a little worried, will I be able to understand the technicalities, the anatomical details? But as I said earlier, it was made so simple that I actually did understand everything. So just one more question, Dr. Cohen. One of the best features that I found about this book is the practice exercises that you have given at the end of every chapter. I am a therapist, so from my perspective or any counselor's perspective, those are like, that can be used as a guide. This book can actually be a lamppost or guiding post for all of us, because it gives all the ready-made exercises, it makes them available to all of us. And they give us new ideas as to how different kinds of homeworks or different kinds of assignments can be given to the clients, so that they can practice the virtues, they can practice the philosophies. So it must have been a very challenging task to come up with these kind of practice exercises, right?
Well, I kind of reached into my experience, working with clients and asked myself, what are the sorts of things that I do? And many of those proceed in terms of giving examples of dialogues with clients. And many of those dialogues, virtually all of them, I've, done some, they were obviously not the real people, because we don't want to disclose personal information, but pretty much they were in keeping with actual dialogues and situations that clients were in. So that helped to show, exemplify the theory in practice. And the follow up on that, and I should mention in the beginning of February, a companion book to this one will be out, which is basically a workbook for people who say they can't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that will be coming out in early February, and that'll expand on that practical aspect of that you're talking about.
That's amazing. In fact, you answered my next question already. That what exactly is in store next? What are you planning to write on? So we are very much looking forward to getting this companion out, and we'll make sure that we read it. And as you are saying, it basically deals with the same important topic. I can't. All the tendencies of I can't. I think people, especially in these times, need something like this. So just not just from the therapist perspective, but I think even every person who will read it, it will be of great help.
Well, thank you so much again for taking the time out to talk to me about the book, and it's moving forward is the goal.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you too for taking out time from your busy schedule to talk to all the viewers here. And I'm sure the therapy and the approach mentioned here will influence a lot of people, and they will work on these lines. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.